Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to my coronavirus special here. Everyone is YouTubing, so I thought I'd put together a project that I'd been thinking about working on for quite a while. 2 years ago, I took my fifth trip to Europe to do some singing, and it was to Canterbury Cathedral. It was a wonderful trip, wonderful music, wonderful fellowship, and truly historic place. And I'd been wanting, I'd posted the pictures online, and I got a lot of feedback from the photos themselves, but I really wasn't able to put a lot of my own heart, my own experience into these photos. So this is a narrated slideshow. Previously, I had sung on the previous 4 trips in Freiburg, Leipzig, Legnica, Prague, Wells, Hereford, Bath, Salisbury, Westminster Abbey, St. Patrick's, Dublin, Southwark, and then this trip to Canterbury. Jenny and I have another trip planned with the choir from St. Luke's Cathedral, Orlando, to Durham, and hopefully the fallout from the coronavirus isn't going to upset that. But we're still planning on it. This trip ended up being very special to me unexpectedly because it was led by Ben Lane, a dear friend of mine. This was my second trip to Europe with Ben, and he passed away last year. It's coming up on a year anniversary of his passing away. He was a dear friend. He had a great sense of humor. He was an amazing organist, an amazing singer, an amazing choir director and choral trainer. He had girls and boys choirs in Orlando that did multiple European tours. And he is missed in so many ways, personally and musically. He was a titan of church music and organ music in Central Florida and in the Southeast, and he is sorely missed. And the reason, partly why I'm doing this in front of Jenny's practice instrument here, she's learning how to play organ, is that less than a month before he passed away, Ben stayed here at our house for a few days while he took vacation. He gave Jenny a lesson on that instrument less than a month before he passed away. So here's the choir. You see Ben there, and then this photo does not have the assistant organist Michael Petrosh in it, probably because he was improvising a postlude to an evensong after this photo was taken. But here's the choir. About a third of the musicians, of the singers here, were members of St. Luke's Cathedral Choir in Orlando. About a third were American Guild of Organist members, or were from singers or organists from near Orlando, kind of around Orlando, out in the surrounding area. About a third were people who, like me, who had been associated with the church or with Ben in some way, and were invited to sing in this choir. There was another guy from Atlanta, Ernest Plunkett. I think we had one guy from Los Angeles, one guy from Las Vegas, but mostly everyone else were centered on Central Florida. It was nice to have the dean from St. Luke's Cathedral, Orlando, Reggie Kidd there as a singer. So let's take a second to talk about the titles that are given to priests in the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Church. When a person becomes a deacon or a priest, they are referred to as the Reverend so-and-so. Beyond that, there's a couple of directions they can go. If a priest becomes the priest of a cathedral, they are called the dean of the cathedral, and their title becomes the Very Reverend so-and-so. Beyond that, if a priest becomes a bishop, they are referred to as the Right Reverend. And yet beyond that, if a priest becomes an archbishop or a presiding bishop, they are referred to as the Most Reverend. And the Anglican Communion is made up of 40 churches around the world, and the heads of all of those churches are called the primates. Okay, so we were told not to expect the archbishop to attend any of the services that we were singing. We were told he's only in residence once in a blue moon, and if he's there, sometimes he doesn't attend worship. But the reason we needed to know is because the procession without the archbishop was different from the procession with the archbishop. And we needed to know the difference just in case he showed up. Lo and behold, he showed up and attended 2 of our evensongs. This is the Most Reverend Archbishop Justin Welby, and you can see Michael Petrosh in this photo here. And he is a very important person, and he is a member of Parliament. Anglicans all over the world pray for him every day. His line of succession goes back 1,400 years all the way to Augustine of Canterbury himself, who Augustine was referred to as the apostle to the English. He is one of the highest ranking non-royals in all of the United Kingdom, and his full title is His Grace the Most Reverend and Right Honourable Justin Welby, Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, Primate of all England. A funny story about him, we knew he was going to be there because we assembled prior to evensong in the treasury, which is just outside of a room where the clergy puts on their vestments. And then, so we knew he was going to be there because he was part of the procession. And the previous day, we had a day off, and all the singers kind of went and did their thing, and he asked one of the singers what they had done the day before, and that particular singer said that he went to Hastings. And so the Archbishop said, "Oh, okay." And then there was just this silence there, and kind of no one knew what to say. Well, the dean, he stepped forward and said the prayer, and we all turned around and formed the procession and started moving. And as we were leaving, the Archbishop pipes back up and says, "Aren't there any battlefields in the United States to visit?" So it was nice to have that kind of levity from him in such a serious occasion. This is the Archbishop's residence when he is in Canterbury, and when he is in residence, that flag is flown there. Here is the view of the Bell Harry Tower and the northwest transept and the chapter house from the courtyard of the Archdeaconry, which is just north of the cloister. The cloister is a square covered sidewalk that offered some protection for the elements so that the monks and the monastics could walk around and say their daily prayers. You'll notice the difference in stone there on the transept, and I'm going to be getting to that here in just a second. But before I do that, let's talk about the layout of these cathedrals here for just a second. All of these old churches were built in cruciform shapes, and they were all facing to the east. So here I have Salisbury Cathedral, and I believe I have Hereford Cathedral and St. Paul's and Washington National Cathedral here in the United States. They are all cruciform, and they are all facing east. Now, the reason that these churches are facing east is that this is both a reflection of God's order, and this is also symbolic of light coming into the world, that which happens in the morning. Now, this tradition was abandoned more or less in more modern times. There's a lot of newer churches that when they were built, they weren't built facing east at all. You can see here some screenshots from Google Maps. The Episcopal Cathedral here in Atlanta, they pray facing south. And just down the street, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, they pray facing north. And down in Orlando, the Roman Catholic Cathedral and the Episcopal Cathedral are literally right across the street from each other. The Catholics pray facing south. The Episcopalians pray facing west. Now, the idea behind setting up the St. Luke's Episcopal Church that way, I'm to understand, is that when service would let out, the doors would open and you could see Lake Eola, but there's been so much development between the church and the lake that you can't see it anymore. And my home church, St. Margaret's, Carrollton, Georgia, they pray facing kind of north, kind of just west of north there. But the tower itself, up to the parapets, is 250 feet tall and demands your attention pretty much no matter where you are in town. The fan vaulting at the top of the tower there is quite stunning and quite beautiful, the way the light fills in during the day. And that cross and shield right there, that aperture is almost 6 feet across. And that piece can be removed, and to open up an aperture with an ancient hamster wheel, human-powered hamster wheel, large enough for 2 people to operate a pulley to lift equipment. The last time it was used was in the 1970s. Here's the panorama of the skyline that I took looking to the northwest, and the church just dominates the skyline of Canterbury. So now let's talk about the newer stone on the building. You can see in several places on the exterior there's what's obviously older stone and newer stone. The stone for constructing the church originally came from a quarry in Caen, France. Caen, spelled C-A-E-N, rhymes with Lopin. And over the years, that quarry, they closed it. And when it came time to make repairs on these buildings, they needed to find a new source for stone that would match the rest of the building. And in 2004, a quarry in Santo, France, which is not far from Caen, was opened, and a lot of buildings that had used the original Caen limestone rushed in to quarry to get stone out of that quarry so that they could make repairs to this building. Here you can see they have been making repairs with the newer stone on this building in Canterbury for quite some time. So Canterbury uses Caen limestone, and Caen limestone was used to also construct Westminster Abbey in London and the Tower of London. Anytime you go to any of these old buildings, something somewhere is going to be under construction, and you can see here the construction on the west facade and part of the south of the nave, and this shot of the west facade. You can definitely see the newest stone up there at the parapets, and also on the west facade the statues of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip in the newer stone against the older stone. Moving now to the interior of the church, or actually this is more still on the outside of the church. These are the dean's steps. These are the steps that we used as members of the choir to enter the church every day for rehearsal and worship. And you can see how worn down they are and how they've been filled in almost like cavities at a dentist office with concrete. And they are all filled in except for that one, that top one. They left it unfilled and all worn down. Staying in the exterior of the church here for just a second. This shot, there's a lot going on in this particular photo. This is a photo of the southeast transept on the right and the southwest transept on the left, and the Bell Harry Tower, and the exterior of one of the chapels. And one of the things that stands out in this photo is you've got 3 different architectural styles going on. You've got the rounded Romanesque style here in the older part of the church, as my kitty cat climbs the back of a recliner. You've got the rounded Romanesque style, and it should be mentioned here that all of these cathedrals were originally built as Roman Catholic churches, all of them in the UK except for one. St. Paul's, London, is the only one that was originally built as an Anglican church. So you've got the rounded arched Romanesque style. You have in the arches in the Bell Harry Tower there, you have the Gothic style with the pointed arch. And then in the transept, you have the wider pointed arch, which is called Perpendicular Gothic. Another peculiar thing is that this chapel here originally had a rounded end to it. And it was remodeled, and the end of it was made flat. That made for a problem, though, in that there was a tomb, which you can see there at the bottom. There was a tomb that was going to stick out of the bottom of the wall, and they just decided to leave it there. They didn't move it. That is the tomb of Stephen Langton, who was the Archbishop of the tomb of Stephen Langton, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury from 1207 to 1228. and he is known for numbering the chapters of the Bible. He didn't number the verses, but he numbered the chapters. Another piece of history centered around this particular photo is centered around World War II. The care that was taken by the people who loved this building that it would survive the war was great. One of the things that they did is they went around and removed all of the medieval stained glass. The stained glass that was merely Victorian, they left, because who cares about Victorian stained glass, right? But the stained glass that was in this part of the church here, the southeast transept, that was Victorian stained glass originally, and it was left there for the war. Another thing they did is they brought in by rail tons and tons of dirt and put it on the floor to try to dampen any high explosives that might fall inside the church. No high explosives fell inside the church, thank goodness. Another thing they did is at night they had men at the top of the tower watching all night long for fire bombs, and if any fell on the roof of the church, it would catch the church on fire, and they were prepared with these long forks to pitch them over the side of the church. Concerning the bombing and this particular facade here, there was a high explosive that fell just outside this transept, and it blew out all of the Victorian stained glass in these windows, and it was later replaced by a Hungarian who immigrated to the UK by the name of Bosanyi. And these are two very famous windows. I couldn't get very good pictures of them because part of the transept was cordoned off as a staging area because they were replacing the pipe organ in the church. But this is the Salvation window, and this is the Peace window. And if you take a very close look at the design of the faces, particularly the female faces, if that reminds you of Walt Disney-like style and aesthetic, you're not the only one to notice that, because Disney was inspired by Bosanyi's style. Getting back to the layout of the church here is a map of the layout of the church, and if you'll notice, going from right to left, let's back up just a little bit. The church was added onto 3 times. This here is basically the original part of the church. And then after the death of Thomas Becket, the murder of Thomas Becket in his own cathedral, it was added onto here, and that is now called the Trinity Chapel. But if you'll notice, the Trinity Chapel itself isn't in line with the what is now called the choir and the high altar area. Choir spelled Quire. And then later, what's called the corona was added onto the Trinity Chapel, but that also is not quite in line with the Trinity Chapel or in line with the oldest part of the church. Parts of this structure date back almost 1,000 years. And the corona is called the corona because when they killed Becket, they cut the top of his head off, and they had on display what is believed to be his the part of the skull that fell off. That was put on display there. And then if you'll notice, the newest part of the church, the westernmost part of the church, which is now called the nave, and they, I guess a little sarcastically, at least in front of Americans, refer to that part of the church as the part that's only 600 years old. That part isn't in line with anything else either. And I have, that's not a mistake in the drawing there. If you take a look, this is a shot I took from the westernmost part of the church, looking to the east. This is from the nave, and you ought to be able to see the center window on the eastern end of the corona centered in the middle of that door. But you'll notice it's not in the middle of that door. It's off to the right just a little bit, moving further to the east and in front of the facade of what was the western facade here. You can still see, if you look from the top to the bottom, the midline of the choir, the oldest part of the church, does not match the midline of what's just to the east of there, which is the Trinity Chapel, which does not line up with the midline of the corona, which is just east of the Trinity Chapel. Here is a view looking from the east to the west, looking straight down from the center line. The nave does not match up. If they can build a wall that's 100, 150 feet high and towers that are over 250 feet high that can stand for centuries, they can add on to a building in line if they want to. This is deliberate. This is not a mistake. And this is also something that you see in a lot of churches, even modern churches. Here is a view from the National Cathedral in Washington, and you'll notice that I guess what they would call the chancel up there past the transepts is a little off to the left. And this construction of this building started in 1907. This is an architectural representation of the tilt of Jesus Christ's head on the cross. And when I learned that, it's something that I can't help but look for in nearly every church I go into. It's quite moving, and it's quite subtle. And what looks like something that could be a mistake is actually something that's motivated out of great faith and out of putting great detail into these buildings. Moving back to the inside of the building here, these are the coronation windows. These are in the northwest transept. Quite beautiful, quite famous. I believe that's Elizabeth II there. This is behind the high altar in the Trinity Chapel. That chair right there is called the Chair of St. Augustine and dates back to the early 13th century. It is this chair where archbishops of Canterbury are ceremonially enthroned. It is part of the outline duties of the archdeacon to take part in this. And this chair is the seat of the bishops, the archbishops in this case, authority. It is called a cathedra without the L, and it is a cathedra that makes a cathedral. It is not the grandiose architecture of a building, although most cathedrals are quite ornate and quite beautiful. It is this chair that makes a room a cathedral, no matter what the room is. Behind the chair is a beautiful mosaic that dates back to the year 1220. It's all of marble, an Italian marble. The design is known as the Opus Alexandrinum, and it is named after a style of paving commissioned by Emperor Alexander Severus for basilicas in Rome, and this is one of the most impressive in all of England. This is at the eastern end of the nave. This compass rose is the symbolic heart of the Anglican Communion. And you see the mitre there on the point that faces east. This is a reflection of God's order. And the inscription in the middle says, "The truth shall set you free." These are the pilgrim steps. These are on the south side of the choir leading up to the Trinity Chapel. Here at the end of the pilgrimage, the pilgrims would climb these steps on their knees. So you see how worn down these steps are over centuries, and it's partly worn down because pilgrims visiting the shrine would climb them on their knees. And where the shrine used to be, there's some stone on the ground, and those stones have depressions in them from centuries of people kneeling on them to be underneath the remains of Becket. The church does not have a parish per se. However, it does have a regular attendance, and it does have a godly playroom. And their godly playroom is a medieval cistern with medieval stained glass and medieval graffiti etched into the stone. In the crypt, there's a chapel set aside here. French Protestant Huguenot and Belgian Walloons have been worshiping here in French since 1865. These stained glass windows are to the north of the corona, and these are called the Becket Miracle Windows. Becket went from being killed to being canonized a saint in 3 years, which still holds the record. It is said, and in order to become canonized in the Roman Catholic Church, it needs to be proven or demonstrated that in your death you are performing miracles for the living. And these tell stories of some of the 700 miracles that Becket performed in death. And taking this one in particular, This is the case of the bleeding monk. The story starts in the left teardrop and then goes clockwise. And you can see in the third teardrop shape there, he's actually bleeding out of his nose. These stories usually tell of someone who is suffering greatly, or is blind or deaf, or in some cases actually dead, and the local non-religious healer is ineffectual, and then someone comes in and invokes Becket, and then they are brought to health. And if you'll notice, there is a box with a green lid on it, and almost all of these stories depict making a donation to Becket, making a pilgrimage to Canterbury. Now, even though this is the heart of Protestantism itself, Roman Catholics worship here twice a year. This site is still very important to Roman Catholics and to Christians all over the world. In fact, while we were there, I heard an awful lot of people speaking German. And so twice a year, Catholics worship Catholic worship in this church, in this place. And right the week before we got there was one of those days. You'll see on Saturday the 7th, the translation of Thomas of Canterbury, 8 p.m. Roman Catholic Mass right there. The translation is when the remains of a saint are moved from one place to another. The weekend before we started singing was the choristers' last weekend before they went on break, and they have several fantastic choirs. The choir who normally sings evensong is made up of about 20 boys and I think about 12 men. The men singing alto, tenor, and bass, and the boys singing first and second soprano. And they allowed the boys to pick what music they were going to sing for the last hurrah of the year. So they sang the Dyson in D, the Dyson in D Magnificat Nunc Dimittis, which is referred to as the Star Wars Magnificat because the first statement is, "My soul doth magnify the Lord," and it's that triplet there, da 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 da. It's got that Star Warsy kind of idea to it, and Zadok the Priest, which is a blowout piece. And then there is all the music we were going to be singing, and right there it says services sung by Orlando Cathedral Men's Choir in Florida. We also heard the girl choir. These were just girls and piano, and they were quite amazing. And if you look at the repertoire here, you've got Purcell and Vivaldi and Pergolesi and Mendelssohn and Vaughan Williams and some Jerome Kern. They really were fantastic, and it was blatantly obvious that the caliber of vocal and choral education that goes on here really is quite good. One of the things I notice when I go to the church is the relative size of things, particularly the books that are in the back of the pews. And here we have their hymnal and the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. And one of the things that I notice is the hymnal is almost always larger than the Book of Common Prayer. And the ratio here at this church is probably one of the largest ratios I've seen. And so I referred to the Book of Common Prayer there as the Booklet of Common Prayer. And I have noticed when I go into churches that if there's a hymnal in the pew racks, the hymnal is almost always larger than any of the other books that are there, including Bibles. And I'll let you read into that whatever you want to. One word about formatting of hymns. Here we have a hymn, and this is typical formatting. You've got two staves. They're kind of widely spaced apart so that all or most of the text of the hymn fits in between them. This is not how English hymnals are formatted. This is how an English hymnal would be formatted of the same hymn. You've got the text is separated from the music on the page. And we all grow up just getting used to what's in front of us. And I had the opportunity to ask an English singer what they think of American formatted hymns, and they say, "Oh, that would drive me crazy because my eyes just have to go around all over the place." But when American singers go over and sing out of English hymnals, their eyes kind of go crazy because they're constantly going back and forth between the text and the music. They threw the Archdeacon, Kelly Joe Moore from New Zealand, threw a reception for us in the courtyard there. The weather was absolutely beautiful. The scenery was absolutely beautiful. And the archdeacon has quite a few responsibilities at the church. One of them is to entertain guests, entertain and provide accommodations for them. That building behind her is her residence. It's the archdeaconry. And parts of the building are legitimately 1,000 years old. And when the reception was over, we were escorted through that undercroft there, which is legitimately 1,000 years old. And it is through this courtyard and through this portal here that it is believed that the knights who killed Becket came through this portal, went to the back of this courtyard, which is where the cloister is, went through the cloister and into the northwest transept to this spot, and it is believed that Becket was murdered right here in this spot. One of the things when you're out and about town, and when I've been to Australia and I've been to the UK quite a few times, and one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, they drive on the left side in the UK, and I've noticed that rule carries over to walking on sidewalks, but it only carries over to walking on sidewalks where there's lots of locals. I had several kind of awkward interactions where I was walking on the right and someone was coming right at me, and they didn't expect me to be there, it seemed like. And once I moved over to the left side, I was walking with everybody else, and it was something that I had to be mindful of, except where there are lots of tourists. Where there are lots of tourists, like this main drag here in Canterbury, everybody walks on the right. So English cathedrals don't have parishes. You cannot join an English cathedral. You can attend there all you want. If you want to join an Anglican church in the UK, you have to go join a parish church. That's why this one is called a parish church. They do maintain a roll of who regularly attends services at the cathedral, and everybody knows who they are, but you cannot join the cathedral, which means that these cathedrals have no lay leadership. The membership of the church is restricted strictly to the priests at the church, which does not include the archbishop. The archbishop is with the diocese, not with the church. And this is only true for one Episcopal church in the United States, and that is the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. All of the other Episcopal cathedrals in the United States are parishes with a lay leadership, usually called a chapter. These gambling machines were nearly everywhere. Just about everywhere that had a place to eat had one of these machines with these lights going off constantly. It was quite annoying. You never saw anyone play them at all. And if you look closely there, this machine has an average payout of at least 78%. It seemed kind of low to me, and I looked it up. American gaming regulations require a minimum payback of 87% on any one machine, and all machines within a casino must have an average payback of 90 to 95%. So if you're at a machine, you're always throwing your money away, at least a little bit. But it looks like these machines, you're throwing your money away a lot, and to invest the money to have them there, but for no one to play them, just seemed kind of strange to me. This is the hall where Queen Elizabeth I celebrated her 40th birthday party in 1573. It's just around the corner from Canterbury Cathedral. And as we take a closer look at the exterior of this beautiful building, we'll notice that it is clad in napped flint. Napping is where stones of certain that fracture in certain ways can be made flat by chipping away at it. And there was napped flint covering a lot of ancient structures in this town. This is part of the city wall. Both sides of it were clad in napped flint. And this is a beautiful ancient building within the precincts of the cathedral, within the cathedral close itself, and it is also clad in napped flint. Another thing to remember when going to the UK and other places, I've seen this in Canada a little bit, is that the ground level floor is not the first floor. It is the 0th floor. So when you get into an elevator, you need to think about that. In the United States, you get on the ground level floor and you go to some other floor. If you press 1 or you press the floor with the star next to it, It's going to take you to the ground level floor. They just number the floors differently. The first floor is the first floor above grade. The Brits know their American culture, and the Canterbury cross is an icon that is recognized all across Christendom. And in Canterbury, the cross, the shape of this cross is everywhere. I took a high-speed train to and from Canterbury, and on my way back, I was able to get a reading on how fast it was going. So this photo right here is the one that I think really brings home what it means to me to go sing on these trips. This photo outlines where we would process. We would, the singers and the priest would gather in a chapel down at the end of this hall, and the organ would start improvising, and then we would process down this hallway, very slowly and stately and with dignity. And we would come down these steps here and hang a left in front of the Old West facade, and then hang another left into the choir, and go to our seats and sing. And what means the most to me about these trips is that this path that we take is a path that has been taken by so many priests and singers over literally centuries. And in the case of this place, Christians have been worshiping here for over a millennium. And it's a very powerful thing to participate in this tradition, in this Christian tradition, and to help wear down these steps. Because when you do that, when I do that, and all these singers do that I was singing with from the States, we become part of a fabric of history, a very strong fabric of history. We become a thread in that fabric. And it's very moving, and it is very touching, and to do it is such a privilege. And I can't wait to go back and do it somewhere, at some other church, at some other ancient place. And I carry that home with me when I sing in the choir at St. Margaret's. Thank you so much for participating. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope everyone's hibernation and sequestration from everyone else amongst this pandemic. I hope everyone's surviving it well. Jenny and I are doing okay. The pets seem to be doing okay. What you smell, huh? What's going on? Huh? What's that? Licky, licky. Okay. Thank you for the visit. I'm doing a lot of cooking. Jenny and I are going to get through this. Jenny's job is secure. My job is mostly secure, although there's always rumors, even in good times. But the rumors lately seem to be a little bit more worrisome. So, but for right now, everything's fine. And we love you. We hope you all are well. And please keep in touch and stay safe. And we want to be able to visit everybody once this is done. So protect yourself, protect each other, and hang in there. We'll get through this.
We all live in a COVID quarantine, a COVID quarantine, a COVID quarantine.